All right, in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how I made this this flow field particle system using only tops. So to start, I'm going to make some variables. So I'm going to make my particle resolution, so particle width, and then let's do particle height. And for right now, let's do 512 by 512. Oops. 512. And then let's do render width and render height. And I'm going to do this by 1080 by, keep doing that, by 1920. Got to tap twice. Okay, and then let's see, what else do I want to add to this? I'm going to add a particle life expectancy. So let's do life expectancy. That's all I can remember for right now. Okay, so let's do a little bit, add a couple more things to this with math. So I'm going to select out my render width and height, so render asterisk, and I'm going to use a math to divide those and combine the channels with divide. So this gives me my aspect ratio, and I'm going to rename that to ratio. I'm going to merge this in. Okay, so now I've got my ratio added in. That's all I can think of for now that I'm going to use with this. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in a null just in case I want to change it. And I'm going to right click on it, say view. I'm going to kind of squeeze it up here and put it towards the top where I know I'm not going to need to click anything behind it too much, so I can keep it keep it available. All right, so now I'm going to start by making my my initial particle reference. So I'm going to do that. For this, I'm going to use a UV map, but because we're not going to use GLSL, I'm going to do it with ramps. So and I'm going to set this ramp size to my particle width and particle height. Okay, so I'm going to use those values for my X values. I'm going to flip-flop this to go with my up and down channels. So let's do, no, that's wrong. Okay, so I've got my 0 to 1 and I got my 1 to 0. And then I'm going to reorder these. And I'm going to, in my reorder, I want to take my red values from input 1. I want to take my green values from input 2. My green values, or sorry, my blue values, I'm going to say 0. And I'll keep the alpha at 1 for now, just so we can see it. So now we have kind of our traditional looking UV map. So we have all of our values going from X to, or from 0 to 1 on the U or the X axes, and then 0 to 1 on the Y axes. So this is just going to be my initial position for my particles. So just in case you haven't done RGB based math in TouchDesigner, that's the way this is going to work. So I'll make myself a little comment here. So red equals U values or X, and my green is my Y, or sorry, my V values or my Y. I know those aren't exactly the same thing, but for now we'll just use that. Okay, so this is going to be my starting positions. Okay, and I'm going to probably add a bunch of things in between that, so I'll spread these out a little bit. Okay, so starting positions, and okay, the way this is going to work is I'm going to be feeding the starting position into a feedback. And every time I loop through my feedback, I'm going to add some sort of velocity to my particles or add at least a direction to my particles. So the way I'm going to do that is by adding another top on top of it. So for now, I'm going to use the composite top and an add. And this is going to be sort of my brain where all the combination of my different influences are going to go for the most part. So I'm going to make it a little bigger just because that's the way my brain works. I want it to be the big thing since that's kind of the main place that things are happening. Okay, so I go into this feedback. I'm going to be adding some velocity to it. I'm going to come out into a null called, I'm going to call this a to position feedback. And then I'm going to drag that to my feedback. Okay, then I'm going to take this out, add another null. This is going to be my position value that I'm going to use for my instancing network. So let's go ahead and build our instancing network now. For mine, I'm going to use a circle as my input, but I'm going to make the divisions way smaller so it's way less polygons. So I'm going to go down to 8 and make this way smaller, 0.001 on the radius, and then I'm going to bring that into a geometry. I'm going to add a material, just going to use a constant, and I'm going to add my camera. And since this is all sort of UV, everything's going to be within this one by one block up in this corner. So I'm going to change my view settings to orthographic. I'm going to go to the bottom left corner, and then I'm going to use my ratio to decide my width. And then I'm going to add my render. And my render size is going to be what my render width and render height are. And okay, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in my instances. So in my geo, I'm going to go to my instancing tab, turn on instancing. I'm going to drag my position into the translate op. And then my X and Y values are going to be R and G. So, okay, perfect. So I've got this nice grid that represents my XY values. Now I know my camera's not perfectly mapped yet. I don't have my X and Y values mapped correctly on my ratio. We'll get to that a little bit later once we have some movement based on how we want it to look. Okay, so that's my initial position setup. So now I want to add some force to this thing, some values that force it to move around. So I'm going to start with my, let's do it for my reorder chop here. So I'm going to try as few places as I can to like not have to reference my renders. I'm just going to use my tops to set the resolutions as much as I can down the whole network. So, so for velocity, I'm going to start with a noise. And I only want it to show the noise. I'm just going to be using that input to drive what the resolution value is here. And let's see, I'm going to keep it black and white, and I'm going to animate it ever so slightly. So I've got apps time.seconds. I'm going to do 22 for now. Let's make it the period of this a bit larger, maybe let's go like 4. And then we're going to have it go from 0 to 1. That's probably fine. Okay. And so I'm going to use this noise to be what's pushing my pixels around. And the way I'm going to go from this black and white value to a velocity value is I'm going to use a slope. So the slope top, it's hard to see here. The slope top allows you to make, it analyzes this top and looks at where the changes are made and gives you in red and green values based on whether it thinks what slope, if you imagine this is like looking at a mountain from above, what the slope of these mountains would be looking down on it. So I'm going to actually go ahead and change this to 32-bit floats. We have good, strong, or nice, precise values. And then I'm going to look into my slope values here. And because I'm using green for my vertical, I'm going to change green from neutral to vertical luminance, change my blue to neutral. Neutral, I think, will always match whatever my 0 point is. Leave my alpha as 1 for now. and then the strength will probably come in and adjust later. So I'm going to change the 0 point of this to 0. So that way my values go not just from zero point 0.5 and up and zero point 0.5 down. I want them to start at 0 so that a negative values are allowed in this. So if I explore here by I hit A and then hit D to look at the detail of this, I can see what my red and green values are. I see some negative values, some positive values. So that's what I want. And then I think if I bring this into a math and I multiply it by a big number, I can visualize what this slope is sort of looking like. So you can see my red and green values. I can also even go in and say my pre-op, I can make sure everything's positive. So I can see even my negative and positive values. So these are my slopes, or this visualizing what my slope values are looking like coming out of this. Okay, so just to get to some visualization of what we're doing here, I'm going to take this into a null. I'm going to call this velocity. And I'm going to add this into my comp. You can see it doing something there. And let's go to our render and see what's happening here. Okay, so already we're getting some interesting movement. I'm going to also help myself out here and add a keyboard in and drag that onto my feedback pulse, reset pulse. This is so I can hit 1 and start over again. Or after my particles inevitably go everywhere and I want to reset to see what's happening. Okay, so this is a good start, but we've made one mistake already. So I want this velocity as these particles move around, my x and y values here are getting updated, and instead of right now, I'm just adding these values to whatever pixel is the exact same pixel in my noise. But what I wanted to do is I want whatever this XY value represents on this noise, like wherever it represents it is on this 1 by 1 block here, that's what I want to sample for my velocity for that pixel. So the way to do a lookup like that in UV space is the remap top. So actually I did that backwards. I want it to be the second input. So the second input in a remap top is the UV values. And then the velocity is going to be my first value. And that's what I'm going to add. That's what I'm going to add here. Okay. So now we get this sort of, we get it. So now we get this different effect. We already see sort of a flow field type effect happening here. And maybe already now I'm going to start bringing this strength down on my slope. I'm going to go about 30% for right now, just to have something a little different. All right, it's already looking cool. Okay, so what do I do next? Next, I think we're going to go in and add a lifetime for each of these pixels. So we want them to restart. This is a trickier thing to do in tops than something like GLSL, where you can just do an easy reset, but there is a way we can do it. So we're going to do that by adding our blue value to be the life. So blue, we're going to say is the life. And we're just going to randomize that life value from 0 to 1 right now, and then we'll use our life expectancy to decide how fast we go from that 1 to 0. So I'm going to create my noise, and I'm going to make it random. We're going to keep this 0 to 1 sort of offset from 0.5, amplitude of 0.5. And all I care about is the noise. Let's go instead of 8-bit, let's do 32-bit. Let's do 32-bit mono, because we only need one channel. And then, okay, now I want this blue to be included in my math here. So I'm going to reorder what's coming in for my starting position. And for the blue value, I'm going to take that from input 2 from the red value. So if I zoom in, I can see my blue values now are nice and randomized from this. Okay, let's make room for everybody. So I've got my positions here, my velocities. I'm going to need more room here. Okay, so now I want to be able to calculate. Well, first I need to subtract life from. I need to subtract life from my particle every frame. So to do that, I'm going to make a constant, and going to only use this to set the resolution. And then this is also going to be a 32-bit mono. And this is what I'm going to subtract every time from my comp. So let's take our life expectancy. Oh, I never set that. So let's do a life expectancy, let's say 5 seconds. Actually, let's go ahead and multiply that by our frame rate too. So let's say by frame. So we'll have a life expectancy of 300 frames. So we want to reflect that in our constant as a fraction. So we go into our constant. I'm going to drag it into this red value as a reference, and I'm going to say 1 over 300, or sorry, 1 over my reference to my life expectancy. And I'm going to take a math. Actually, I think I can just go ahead and make it negative here. Yeah. So you'll see I've already got this set to that value. So I'm going to put this in a null, and I'm going to name this null, we'll call it age, and bring that into my system. Okay, so now we're starting to bring that down. Okay, now I've got a problem because I need to not have it, as you can tell here, it's going across all my channels right now, and I actually don't want that. I'm going to use a reorder, and I'm only going to use the blue value. So everything else could be 0, so it doesn't affect my comp. So now I should be only subtracting blue values. I think that's working. Okay. So now how do I, after my particles die, how do I bring them back and restart them? So let's do that. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a threshold. So from my feedback, I'm going to take out a threshold. And I'm only going to use the blue channel. And we're going to take it, we're going to take that down to 0. Is this moving down? All right, we'll get to that. We're going to have a threshold of 0. Nope. What did I do? Wrong button. 0. Okay. And then, so whenever, something's not working right. Okay. Let's see. What am I doing wrong? My blue is getting added. My age. Oh, okay. There's a problem here. Oh, I know. All right. Okay. Instead of blue, actually, because this doesn't have a blue channel, I'm going to use luminance. There we go. So now I've got a value. It is rounding it funny. Instead of luminance, let's go to red. There we go. Okay, so the red, because it's one value, it's only going to have a red value. So I'm going to only take the red value. That should be subtracting all the way down here. As you can see, there's no blue left because all the blues are negative. And my threshold. Okay, and I want this to be everything greater than 0 is going to be clear, and everything that goes below 0 is white. Great. Okay, now that we're back on track. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to multiply this by our starting position. So bring in a multiply and multiply that by our starting position. And then that will go over the top of my comp. Explain this in a second. So this needs to be over. I'm going to go over this guy, and then that goes into the feed. Okay, so what's happening here, you can see in my particle system here, it's resetting perfectly. So what's happening is every frame I'm subtracting that little bit of blue, and as that blue hits 0, when it goes below 0, it triggers that pixel to go white, and then that triggers my my multiply to show that pixel over the top. So then the next loop on the feedback, that pixel is back to its original starting position. So it moves around, does whatever it wants as the blue is reducing, and as the blue gets to zero, it triggers the threshold, which then resets that pixel back to our starting position. All right, and as you can see here, we're getting a lot of flickery stuff. What can happen because I'm doing this random life here? It's some of the pixels have a lifetime of like 0. So I'm going to go in here, add a math, and I'm going to give some of these pixels just a little pre-add, just 0.05 boost. So that way, they always start with a little more than a second. So now none of the pixels are just resetting every single frame, because that's kind of a useless pixel. Okay, so what do we have here? So we've got the sort of like, bubbling fluid sort of effect happening. What else can we add to this? Okay, one of the things that you can do is add a curl noise. And this, I can't remember who I learned this from, but it's one of my favorite effects to add in this sort of particle system. And essentially, I don't know if I'm going to do a great job explaining this, but essentially, I'm going to be changing this velocity value. Instead of pushing directly outwards, I'm going to change it to send a velocity in the perpendicular position, or a 90-degree angle from what this velocity is. And the way that I do that is I reorder the velocity values, and I swap the red and the green. So I swap output red to green, output green to red, and then I'm going to take a math, and I'm going to flip the red values from -1 to +1. So I'm going to go -1 to +1 to 1 to -1. And then when I bring that into my velocity, I get a curl noise. Cool. Okay, let's add some color to this. So let's stretch things out a little bit here. Let's add another from my reorder, my initial reorder. I'm going to go to a noise, and I'm going to turn off monochrome. I'm going to pump my period up to like 12, and I'm going to animate it. So my transform Z value, I'm going to go apt time.seconds. Let's do, these can be a pretty high one because it's the color changing. So I'm going to do 100 actually. So it's going to be pretty subtle changes over a long time. Oh, I need to also change it so it's just the noise. And let's go even bigger on the period. I want it to be fairly like similar color the whole time, so it's slowly changing. But one thing I do want to add to this is I want to add a little bit of grain to this so that the pixels don't just sort of mush together in one big color. So let's add another noise. And this one, I am going to keep the input plus noise, but I'm going to say, okay, the starting values are going to be, I'm going to start my noise value from 0, and I'm only going to add, like point, let's see, what does 1.1 look like? Oh, and I also want to change the type to random. So I just want to add like a little bit of graininess, a little bit of variation in what the color of the pixel is, but still keeping it the same pixel color almost. Okay, so that's going to be my color. And let's see, what else do I want to do with this? Okay, another thing I want to do with this is as the fluid moves around, I want the color to stick to that pixel. So we'll kind of see little wisps of color that move around kind of continually. I could just throw this. Let's actually take a look at what that looks like first. So if I didn't do that, I'm going to make my color null here. If I just threw it into my instancing, so if I go to my geo, the second tab of instancing, and throw this in the color RGB, this is, okay. And like we're getting color sampling, but these purples will always be in this bottom left corner, and these pixels will always be here. It's because yeah, I mean they're just constantly changing. It's not sticking to the value throughout the lifetime. And I want to see like when it gets assigned a color, I want it to stay that color throughout the entire time. So the way I'm going to do that is by using a feedback loop, and I'm going to use my same threshold from my position as well. So I'll take this into a feedback loop. I'm going to do a select to copy my threshold, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to multiply this by what the original color is, and then that's going to go over, I'll tell you here, that's going to go over my feedback. Okay, so doing what we want. Oh, I need to pump it back into the feedback. So that needs to go back into the feedback. I'm going to also add my keyboard reset to that feedback. Okay, so now when I hit one, I'll get really dark right now. Let's pump the amplitude up. That'll be more dynamic. Okay, I think that's doing what I want now. The colors are kind of moving more smoothly. You see that purple kind of like lasting longer into the simulation. Okay, what else can we add to this? I'm seeing some of these, it's pulling off of the edge here. Let's go ahead and see what that would look like if I had that loop around. The way we can do that is before our feedback, we can go in here and add a limit, and we can say we want to loop our values from 0 to 1, and we only care about that if we go to the comma. We want to turn off the blue and the alpha. So we don't care about those staying within that loop. So now we'll see pixels kind of moving in from the other side, some colors kind of mixing. You may or may not want that. I think it's nice to kind of get some interesting colors coming in from the other sides of this. Okay, so next, let's make our sort of output post processing here, because these right now feel pretty flat in 2D. So I'm gonna go add a feedback, and let's see, let's add a levels, and let's drop our opacity 0.09, or sorry, 0.995, and then our black level, I'm going to say 0.02, and then let's put the output over that, drag that back into our feedback. Let's get rid of this, or let's make an output here. And then instead of looking at our render, let's view our output. Okay. Cool. All right, we're getting some interesting stuff. Um, One of the things you might be seeing, it's kind of maybe hard to tell on the screen, but like some of these particles are kind of like popping on top of each other. We're getting sort of this sparkly sort of effect. One of the ways to get rid of that is to go into our material, and in the common page, we're going to turn off the depth test. I don't really care which one's actually, they're all technically on the same like Z depth. And so we'll just let it be that whichever one gets drawn last is the one on top. Um, let's see, what else can we add to this? It's already this. Okay, so one of the effects that I added is I added sort of a camera angle to this. So instead of my orthographic now, I could, oh, actually, one thing I'm just realizing we haven't done is we haven't fixed this to our normal frame. So we could just use it like this, I guess. We can, if we don't care about it being, actually, yeah, we can just leave it as it is, because we're gonna use the camera to move around on it a bit. So we're gonna change to a perspective camera now, and I'm gonna use my mouse and sort of zoom in here. I'm gonna put it at a little bit of an angle, get sort of an interesting angle on it. Zoom in, so I get some close particles, some far away. Um, Let's see. It's a little hard to tell sometimes when my camera view is wrong here. All right, let's see. I'm using my render out as sort of my reference here, so get it around to a spot that feels good where I'm covering the whole frame. Okay, I think that feels all right for now. And then I'm going to also go in here. Let's do a little bit of sort of color correction at the end. And pump my gamma a bit, pump my contrast a little bit. I'm also going to add this sort of rack focus look too, using a luma blur. So I'm going to create that using a ramp. I only use the res for the resolution, and then in the ramp, I'm going to go with a circular ramp. I'm going to hold my values, and let's see. I'm also going to transform this a bit. Let's make the circle bigger first, actually. So let's bring out the black in the middle. Oh, I'm going to bring the black out a little more in the middle so there's a nice and focused spot. And then I'm going to transform this a bit to, I want the scale to be a little bit wider, and I'm going to rotate it just a little bit just to give it a little more interest, and then make sure in my tile that I'm going to repeat what's happening there. So if I bring that into my luma blur, I should be getting a little more. Let's shrink these down, maybe the particles, or maybe I should be fading my particles out a little faster. So if I go back to my levels, let's say, let's bring that down to a 9.0. Brings my trails off. Okay, one thing I forgot to add here. One thing I really like to do in big, busy particle systems like this is I like to add little points of interest that kind of, even though I added that noise to the color so I can see sort of the grain of this, I want to add a little more contrast by having some particles that are just always white particles, so that it'll give a little more motion to it. Also, sometimes if this noise goes dark, in fact, let's go ahead and I brought the amplitude up earlier, but let's bring the offset down, so that way we get a sort of a bigger dynamic range of color, and sometimes it'll even go into black. And I kind of like the look of that when it gets dark sometimes, but yeah, only when I also add these white particles on top. Let me show you how I do that. So I'm going to take a noise. I'm going to only set it as the noise output. All right, let's shrink this down. Let's get it out of the way a little bit for now. So only the noise output. I'm going to make it random. And then I'm going to put that into a threshold. And I'm going to put this at like 0.99. Yeah, maybe even higher, maybe 4 or something. Okay, so I only get a couple sparse pixels here that are going to be over the top. And then I just realized I never brought this in. Well, earlier, I guess when I thought that it was working to make my particles stick, I guess it wasn't actually working. Okay, so but now it should. All right, moving on. Let's do another over. We're gonna do this one over this time. So this one over this one. So that way I've got these white particles that are always there. Pull that in. Okay, and now I've got my nice white particles. And you can see, like, it's nice to have those sort of white trails. They add that extra contrast to what's happening in here. Okay, what else could we do for this thing? Oh, I'm getting like kind of a jump in those particles. What's happening here? All right, let's go back to our Luma blur. We never quite finished that part out. So we're gonna actually use the white to filter more. So let's blur out some of that background so that get that nice rack focus. A little hard to see when it's dark like this, but just moving my blurs a little bit more. Let's change our color seed just to get a different look. Maybe this is a little too low. Okay, so one of the things we can play with here, obviously, like the what our noise is doing is affecting a lot. So maybe if instead of a noise, what if we instead used a ramp to like to change the motion. So if I set the resolution only on this ramp and then I put the period to something regular, so that way, oops, 1/4. And then if I'm going to, let's see, and then I'll animate the phase way slower. Let's see, well, let's go over 5. And then let's do an ease in, ease out. And actually, I want this wave to sort of be a ramp up and ramp down. So I'm going to put the white in the middle of this ramp and go between white and black and ease in, ease out. So now if I use this as my slope input, I should start to get something a little different. Okay, so that's maybe not as interesting. What if I transform it and rotate it a little bit, and then in my tile, I make sure I say I want to hold that value, or let's say repeat. There we go. And I think I'm getting a problem because this is not 32-bit float. There we go. So now we're getting a little wave motion happening. Maybe not as cool as the noise. But anyways, these can get, we can switch out what these are doing, maybe combine the two of these in some way so you have noise and this wave. Um, in fact, let's just see what they look like. So go into this and we say, noise or input plus noise. So now we get a little of both. Maybe I turn my slope down a little bit. Maybe also go to my ramp and say, I don't want this to have as much of an influence on it, so I can just bring the value of the white down so it's less of an influence on this. And maybe if I go back to like what this looks like in the big scheme of things, you can see what these pixels are rendering out with. Okay, yeah, and so now we've got this nice little flow field. You can obviously take the camera into different views and get different looks into what this looks like. Maybe instead of our noise input, you could use the optical flow feedback that I talked about in another video, so you can make this interactive to move the particles around. You could also animate between the different velocity flow fields that you're making. Um, or you can instead of using this ramp to like start the initial positions, maybe you want all the positions to be within a small circle. You could do that, maybe start with like a sprinkle sop with a circle and have those be your initial positions. Yeah, if that doesn't make sense to you, maybe there's a tutorial I can make about that in the future. But anyway, I hope you make something cool out of this. I definitely want to see if you make something with this. So definitely share it with me if you make something. And that'll be it. Thanks.